The first missing point, which ends up being very confusing for the artists from perspective videos, is to point out that this sort of theoretical framework presentation of perspective actually comes from the needs of architects and wanting a dramatic and effective format in which to present their building designs to prospective clients. And a simple box can easily be added to in all different ways, all the time highlighting our building. And it can result in visually some very dramatic presentations, whether it's grandiose or quite simple. The problem is for the artist is that generally they're not drawing individual buildings designed to persuade a client to part with a lot of money to build them. As artists, we're continually confronted with real-life situations that we want to draw that bear very little relationship to our perspective diagrams. And the problem is the needs of artists weren't the needs that this was designed to meet. And therefore these videos don't point out to artists many of the things they need to know to be able to make sense of this in a real-life situation. So the first point we need to understand is that these formats haven't been designed with the needs of artists in mind. They've been designed as part of the process of showcasing architecture. The second thing that perspective videos confusingly miss out is to make clear that foreshortening the visual compression of things as they move further away is just as important a part of perspective and understanding perspective as vanishing points are. This is two sides of the one coin. As objects move away from us, they get smaller. They get smaller in the vertical and they get smaller in the horizontal. They get smaller by height, so they get shorter. They get smaller by width, so they become narrower. This and this are exactly the same principles operating in the vertical and the horizontal. And we need to learn them and understand them both at once in that way, because they both apply to anything we go to draw at the same time. As the object moves away, it becomes smaller on the vertical and it becomes smaller on the horizontal. It becomes visually compressed as it moves further away, which is why the halfway point in this wall is actually a lot further along than the apparent halfway point between here and here. The focus that perspective is all about this happening, when it's just as much about this happening, is very unhelpful for artists. The third point that's so often missing from perspective videos is that this is absolutely right and true, but it only works the way it appears to work here if the ground is completely flat and if all of our objects are at right angles or parallel to each other. But for the artist, life is so often not as neat and simple as that. It simply doesn't work as neatly as this. When the ground slopes downwards or upwards or curves around and goes up and down. But again, it's easy to think that there's something wrong with us when we can't apply this to this, because by not telling us what we need to know, the videos have left us under the false impression that we have been told everything we need to know, and that therefore the problem is with us. The fourth thing that I believe most perspective videos don't point out is that eye level is of a greater significance than vanishing points. Visually, the vanishing points are very prominent because they seem to be controlling all of these diagonals that affect so much what our drawing looks like. And so there's this great focus on vanishing points. Where do they go? How do we know where to put them? Have I got them in the right place? And yet, in my experience, of far greater importance is to understand eye level, and in any drawing that we're doing, to try and work out where it is. Because eye level is the line, anything horizontally aligned will line up in a straight line, because that's the level of our observer or our camera or us. Above that, the lines increase in angle. Below that, they increase in angle in the other direction. So eye level is the pivotal factor in working out our angles. For any given scene, there is only one eye level, and all the vanishing points for anything in that scene must be on it. And as artists, when we have a larger scene, working out where eye level is, even when we're drawing something fairly briskly and freehand, working out roughly where eye level is means that we end up with a point that we know that anything we do here, any perspective angles that we get, that for any individual object we have here, the perspective angles of any part of it need to be able to credibly meet on this line. To know where eye level is essential to approximately locating our vanishing points in the right place. The fifth thing that's often not made clear is that the principles of perspective affect everything in our scene, not just boxes and not just buildings. That the principles of perspective are just as relevant if we're looking at a crowd of people or a small object, or if we're looking at a natural scene. Eye level, vanishing points, foreshortening are all at work here just as much as they're at work here. By not making clear that the perspective principles affect everything in our scene, we're not positioned to really understand exactly what perspective is, most fundamentally, not just to do with buildings, but for everything. And I suspect because this does look a lot like this, and not much at all like this, it's easy to think that somehow those perspective diagram principles aren't at work here. It's another shortcoming. Architects may not need to learn about this, but as artists, we certainly do need to understand visually how our scenes change, all our scenes, all the objects in our scenes change when our viewpoint changes and our distance changes, as our viewing position changes.
And if you're finding this video helpful, then please help me out. Hit the like button, leave a comment, and of course, if you haven't subscribed already to my channel, why not?
The sixth point, which I think causes confusion by being missing from most perspective videos, is pointing out that getting perspective right isn't just considering things such as where is the eye level, where do these lines go, but it's also about the patterns that this makes when we're not looking at very basic fundamental geometric shapes, but that we start to look at objects with the complexity of life. That even in a complex scene with lots of parts, and the ground level here slopes down, but that we still get an eye level, we still get a spot where there is basically a horizontal line moving across the entire scene, and the pattern that above this, the angles of any horizontal elements or any horizontally aligned elements always increases, and it works the same in the other direction below eye level as long as the ground is flat. This is where flat ground takes us. So this part down here is managed differently to accommodate that. But if we understand the pattern, this fan-shaped pattern that hinges, that pivots on eye level, if we understand that pattern, it's so much easier to see it in a life situation. And what we can see more easily and understand more clearly, we can draw more accurately. My seventh and eighth missing points from perspective videos that I think end up being confusing for artists is that firstly, while this for an architect is helpful, showcasing either an individual building or a small cluster of buildings, which they're designing from scratch from their imagination. But that for the artist, the benefit of understanding this is not that it tells us what to do, but it shows us what's happening in life and gives us the information and gives us the framework to both understand it and therefore to see it more easily. If I've just watched perspective videos, I may look at this scene and think, hang on, all of these angles are meant to line up on the same line, but these windows are different to these windows and they're different to those windows. Why doesn't this work in my reference? And if I'm drawing this because of misapprehensions I have from this, I may actually be lining these up all the way across the building facades, at least in angle, if not in straight line. What I need to understand is that if this doesn't appear to work in life, that this is not the problem. Life is not the problem. I don't yet understand enough about this to apply it in this scene. And I probably don't understand it because it's not been pointed out to me when I watch this video. In fact, the reason these angles don't line up, is because they would only line up if this street was straight. In fact, this street is slightly curving around, and that curvature means that this doesn't work the way we expect it to, which is everything going to the one vanishing point. As the buildings curve away, multiple vanishing points are formed moving to the right. One vanishing point for each facade tilted at a different angle. And the 8th point flows from that, which is while this and understanding these principles, understanding in simple terms what happens can be useful, and it can be a useful way to start to get our head around the issue of perspective. That if I'm an artist who draws from life or from photos, that in some ways I don't need to understand any of this. I could simply really sharpen my powers of observation and draw what I see. And I think that's a very important point that these videos don't make. Not understanding this will not stop me from being able to draw any scene that I have a reference for or that I have in front of me. I can simply observe the angles and the widths that are in front of me. Although I do believe if we understand the underlying principles, it's easier to observe and therefore easier to draw accurately. Now, if I draw from my imagination, then it's different. Then I become more like the architect. Only instead of showcasing individual buildings, I'm perhaps drawing streets. And if I want to draw streets, unless there happen to be very large areas of very flat land of buildings lined up parallel or at right angles to each other, then the last thing I need to know is that I'm not equipped from most videos I watch to start to create from my imagination scenes that don't involve flat planes and lots of right angles and parallel buildings. That there's more I need to learn. It's not that it's particularly hard to learn. The problem is that the oversimplification of these videos has made me think that I've learned basically everything I need to know. The problem is that the oversimplification in these videos and that they don't tell us what they haven't told us leads us to think that the problem is in us in not understanding how this applies to this. I have at least 100 videos on various aspects of perspective, but I do have a short playlist of 12 or 13 videos where each video steps through a lot of these situations we've talked about and some real life photos where the ground does go up and down and curve slightly, and looking to see how this does apply to these more complex situations, which is useful both if we draw from life or from photos or from our imagination. I'll link that playlist to this video. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. If perspective has been an ongoing issue for you, I hope this video has helped by pointing out all the shortfalls in so many perspective videos. It's my belief that most of the confusion most artists suffer in trying to apply these videos to real life situations when they're drawing is not because we're not capable of understanding what's at work, but because the videos we watched gave us the false impression that they'd equipped us now to go and apply these few basic simple principles somehow in life. They didn't tell us the very limited conditions in which these principles worked the way these videos were telling us. I hope this has given you confidence that you can understand perspective, that you can see it as your friend, and that you can incorporate it into your drawings, whether they're buildings or nature or a combination. But whatever you draw, however you draw in it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.